Hello, everyone. Welcome to this weekly webinar produced by Business Performance USA. We're so glad to have you today, and we hope you enjoy our great Emily Shoup, who's going to talk with us about Smooth Ride, 5 strategies for leading a strong and motivated team with less conflict. And wouldn't you know, just before I began the webinar, I started to have some interesting little things going on, so I hope everyone is able to see my screen. And we'll see if it's going to work. There we go. You're seeing my picture. I'm Cynthia Stewart. I'll be your host today. And my company is Evermore Services. I'm one of the volunteer executives that help co-found Business Performance USA. And with us today, we have your presenter, Emily Shoup. So before I actually introduce her, let me make sure that you know you can make this hour worth your time by participating. And what you can do is you can go to the question feature if you have any questions for Emily. Just type those in. I'll be monitoring those, and I'll be sure and ask her. Also, know that we do record these every week, and so you can go out, join businessperformanceusa.org, and you can sign up today, and it's no cost to you. And you can go and see Emily's other webinars, as well as other speakers that we host here each week. So we're really glad to have you, and we're ready, I think, to go ahead and just introduce Emily. And let's see if I can page forward. There we go. There she is, Emily. She is known for revving up your leadership, and she has all kinds of tools and tricks in her very talented experience that helps teams just get along better, work better together. And today she's going to address that issue of conflict. Actually, Emily started her working career in large corporations and universities. She was a network engineer, and she grew to become a manager of network engineers. And later, she was an assistant director of technology before she founded her company just about 3 years ago. And over the course of her career, Emily realized that people were her passion and not network engineering. And so she began to focus her efforts on developing not only her own people skills, but those of others around her as well, especially on her teams. And now she's a speaker and a coach and an entrepreneur, and she's created Central Illinois' premier team building event, Operation Our Town, in addition to very popular programs that she gets called for all the time, called Lead Any Team, and the Shoup Shift, 6 gears to revolutionize your culture, team, and leadership. And she's sharing one of those gears, conflict, today. Over the past few years, Emily has received the honor of being asked to contribute to her writings to ManagingAmericans.com, which is a pretty cool site, and The Unstoppable Woman's Guide to Emotional Well-Being, as well as being asked to speak and lead events in her state and beyond. And you'll find her insightful, engaging, and internet energetic. So with that, I'd like to just pass the baton to you, Emily. Let me pass the screen over and share your screen. And you should see it on your side.
Pass that virtual baton.
That's right.
All right, is it showing now?
Well, it may be, but not on my screen. I've lost my... Okay, we heard that we do have it, so thanks. I'm going to go ahead and mute. I'll be very quiet until I get muted. Thank you.
Super. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and always happy to be here and to be working with you guys on all these great topics. And today we're focusing on conflict, and it's probably the topic that I get asked about the most. I was talking with some people the other day, and when I used to fix computers, as soon as people found out that was my job, they would say, hey, could you fix this over here? Can you fix that over there? And then now that people know that I'm a leadership consultant and a coach, now it's, can you fix my people conflicts over here and the problems with the people over here? And unfortunately, there is no magic wand to just fix people, but there are a lot of tools to make it go better. I just think it's always funny how people are always looking for that quick fix, and I didn't realize conflict was going to be really the hot topic for a lot of people. So I'm excited to talk about it with everybody today. And really, through working with my clients and private coaching interactions, what I find over and over again is when leaders manage conflicts well, there are just a lot less strains on the relationships and on the teams, and the teams can be that much more productive. Conflicts really, really slow everybody down, uh, even even in times when you don't think it would really matter, even in situations where you would think that it wouldn't matter that the two people working next to each other aren't getting along 100%. It really amazes me at how much it can really start to slow everything down and consume a lot of time, especially on the manager or leader's portion of their day, just trying to get through all those conflicts. And I know that's where a lot of the people that I work with get so frustrated because they just want to get some work done, and they end up feeling like they're babysitting a lot more often than engaging in what they feel is real work. As a leader, though, you're working on teaching everybody how to interact with one another and how to be successful in your organization. And a lot of times I see people want to step back and say, well, they should just know, they should just figure this out on their own. They're adults, they should be able to do all this. But really, everybody wants to be successful in their positions. And anytime that's threatened in any way, a conflict might arise. Or if they're not 100% sure what it takes to be successful in their role, a conflict might arise. So a lot of focus is spent on how to resolve conflicts and how to manage conflicts, as well as then setting up expectations so that people can know how to navigate through things. Um, the other point I wanted to make before we dive in on how to resolve conflicts, we're going to go through some steps that'll help you speed things along for yourself and for the people that you're working with to get other people to resolve issues without engaging you as often. The other point that I wanted to bring up is that conflict is good. There, without any conflict, if you never hear of any conflict in your organization, I would be a little bit concerned, because through conflict comes usually it comes from some passion and from people actually caring about their jobs. If people didn't care, weren't passionate, had no new ideas, had no different ways of getting things done, they probably would never conflict. They would just come in and do a bare minimum job and go home every day. Not a big deal, not a lot of conflict. But when there's conflict, it usually means that somebody got passionate about something. Somebody got excited, somebody had an idea, which may have then stepped on somebody else's toes, or it may have made that other person uncomfortable for some reason or another. And it may be taking things in a different direction, and then that can um, confuse people, and they're not sure where to go with that information. So conflict, I find, is good. One of the clients I was working with that was running into a ton of conflict was conflicting with the president and a marketing person wanted to move everything forward, and two other managers wanted everything to stay the same. So there was a ton of conflict, but that conflict was a good thing. It meant that they were growing and they were trying to get ahead, and it was just a matter of managing through it and getting everybody up to speed and everybody heard. And we'll go through some of the steps that it takes to go through all that. But I just wanted to start with, as much as we all want to not have to ever deal with conflict, it's a good thing. It's a good problem to have, as long as it's not consuming your entire workday. And I will tell you too that the number one reason conflicts happen everywhere I go, everybody that I talk to, is it boils down to some sort of fear. And that fear can come from a lot of different places. But if you know that going into any conflict and you start to look at what could possibly this person be afraid of, it starts to change your perception on how you're going to tackle the conflicts. So some of the fears could be a fear of losing their job, a fear of uh, not being seen as successful, a fear of failure, a fear of saying the wrong thing or just looking bad. And it could be a fear of something else that's happening outside of the work team that you don't even know about or doesn't even seem related to the situation at hand. So knowing that the number one reason conflicts happen is fear starts to put a different twist on things for you. I know that if you're a parent, if you take a step back and you look at why do you get afraid when your kids do something. So when your kid runs out in front of a car and you scream at them because you're so mad, and so upset about it, that's because your instinct said, well, I'm afraid my kid's going to get hit by the car and die, that or get extremely hurt. That is extremely scary. That very simple primal feeling comes up in work on a regular basis when somebody's threatening your positions, threatening your credibility, your authority, all of those things. And so just knowing that works into there seems to help a lot when I get people to start to focus on that first. So I wanted to make sure I shared that with you. So we're going to go through a few steps that I like to go through. There are 5 steps that I like to go through just to kind of get through a conflict. And we're going to high level them because obviously we could go into much greater depth in each of them. But just for you to have some steps that you can take back and start using today. And the very first step is to understand and to seek to understand the conflict at hand. And what I like to do in this step is have you take a step back and say, is it me in this situation? Am I the one causing this conflict? Am I the one that maybe I'm the only one that sees that there's a conflict? A lot of times there's conflicts and the other person doesn't realize it. So taking that look into is it me? And then really stepping back then and looking and say, what do I want? So if I'm having a conflict with my coworker, what is it that I wanted to happen? Or what do I want to happen? What didn't go the way I thought it would, or why am I upset about this? And so same thing when you're working with your staff, if you have somebody who comes into you and says that they're upset about somebody, ask them to do a little self-reflection and ask themselves, is it something that they did? Or what is it that they wanted? And a lot of times people kind of skip over that. They just go with whatever emotion they're feeling, and they don't realize really what it is that they wanted. And it's hard to start in and dive into getting a resolution if you don't even know what that resolution would look like. So the more you can take a step back and say, okay, this is what I want out of this conflict, or this is why it's a conflict, this is why it bothers me. When you jumped in on this meeting, it made it look like I didn't know what I was talking about. It made it look like I hadn't done my work when I had. Okay, well from there you can take it and figure out what the resolution would be. But without that, you're just talking about why you're upset, which isn't usually very useful. The next step then that I like to go through is trying to look at the other side. And this is one of the things where many of the companies I've gone into, I have sat down and facilitated discussions to just let this happen, where you just let the other side tell their story, let them clear their air, let them be heard. And I cannot tell you how many times it's been something that's happened years ago that other person or that other team never got a chance to clear the air, tell their side of the story, give their opinion as to what happened, what went right or what went wrong. They just never felt like they were heard. And that alone ends a lot of conflicts, just letting that other person be heard. And in that, all you're doing is sitting down with the person that you're having conflict with, and you're, agreeing that there's a conflict, and you let them give their side of the story. That's all there is to it. There's no judgment. There's no trying to fix anything. There's no trying to justify or dig deeper. You just want to understand what it is that has upset them and just let them get it out. And like I said, a lot of times just that action can diffuse the situation immensely. It might not resolve it, although a lot of times it has resolved it with my clients, but it also it definitely will diffuse things if the other person has been heard and and things have been gotten out in the open. And then the other amazing thing that happens is that our perception may have been completely wrong of the situation. So there's a lot of times as a consultant, I come in and I get to hear both sides of the story. But when I have the two people together share both sides of the story, there's a lot more for them to understand out of it. And then they realize that their perception of what had happened may have been wrong. It may have been completely wrong. The assumptions that they added to the situation may have been completely wrong. Um, the the stories, I find that we're awfully creative, right? We can come up with amazing stories, just like if you're at the mall and you're looking around and you see, somebody having a fight, you can usually guess that I come up with some very elaborate stories as to why I think these two are fighting and what it is they're actually saying, but I don't know because I haven't asked them. I'm just observing from the outside. Same thing in a conflict. If you haven't asked the other person, you don't really know what their point of view is, what it is that's upsetting them, or why they did something that they did. There was a situation where it was the one I was alluding to earlier, where there was a meeting and a manager was upset because he thought his toes were being stepped on and his authority was being second guessed. Well, it turns out when he had the conversation with the other person who he was having the conflict with, having that conversation found out, well, his manager had actually suggested that he say those things, or it had prompted him to bring up these ideas in the meeting. So although it felt like a conflict between the two people, it was through the guidance of the other person's manager. There was just a whole lot more to the whole story, and it wasn't any sort of career sabotage or stopping of a major project like it had felt like to the person. So really diving in and understanding what the other side is. And again, if you can do steps 1 and step 2, a lot of times you might be done right there. You might not have to do anything else. And so again, with your teams, you're going to ask them to do the same thing. Look at what it is that they want, do a little self-reflection to see if it's them that it might be causing the conflict, or they could have handled something differently. And then getting them to look at the other side and hear the other side and let that other side be heard. Just understanding that you might be wrong in your perception of what's going on. Okay, step 3. This one is not quite a step, but it definitely it fits in the middle, and it's all about knowing your style. So when you handle a conflict, everybody has natural tendencies. You might dominate, you might avoid, you might accommodate, you might compromise, or you might tend to collaborate. So everybody has a style that they lean towards most of the time. And knowing that up front helps you understand how you want to handle a conflict. And a lot of times people really choose to either avoid a conflict or just engage full on and kind of make the conflict worse by not really thinking things through. But I like to take it a step back. There's no, unless you're working in an emergency room in a dire life and death situation, there's no rule that says you have to handle the conflict immediately. I suggest that you do handle it, but not you don't have to dive in at the second that it happens. So if you're taking a step back and you're doing the self-reflection and you're looking at the pieces, one of the things you want to look at is knowing how you like to handle things. And and there's different times for different things. There's certain things that are more urgent and more pressing, where dominating, is going to have to be the style that you go with. But there are times when collaborating for the long term might be a better approach. Collaborating takes a lot longer. And then knowing your style, knowing, okay, I know that I tend to avoid any time that there's a conflict, or I know that I tend to try to accommodate and just smooth things over for the other person. Knowing that, and knowing that you would really do want to resolve the conflict, what can you do to take steps to make sure that your needs are met? Or if you tend to dominate and you know that you tend to dominate, but you really want to resolve the conflict, what can you do to make sure that you're not too dominating in this situation so that the other person's needs are met so that the conflict actually resolves and you don't just push your way through it? So knowing your style is very important. Uh, the one that I do have to warn you about a little bit is the people who tend to accommodate and compromise a lot, the people who tend to hang out in there. They seem like great people to have on your team and great people to have around, and there are a lot of they're usually pretty easy to work with, um, but they're the ones that silently, usually pretty silently, get frustrated at a workplace and then just kind of disappear. They end up quitting on you, or finding another job somewhere or another, some way or another, because if they're always accommodating and always compromising, eventually their needs are never going to be met. So so I like you to know your style and then always start to look at, okay, now what's the style of the person that I'm having the conflict with? How do they normally handle situations? And know that accommodating or compromising, although great ways to come to a resolution, that's not always going to be the best solution for everybody in every situation. So I always like to have people to dig a little deeper into those areas so that you can really start to um, figure out the best way to handle the situation and to get everybody to get the most out of the situation. What I find with some clients is that there's somebody who always dominates, and then everybody else will always avoid dealing with that person. And so in those situations, okay, if you know you always dominate, what are you going to do to take a step back and not dominate the situation? What can you be doing to make those those shifts in your approach to the situation? And then also too, if you know that everybody's starting to avoid dealing with anything with you, then you might be, it's a good sign that you're dominating too much, and and could be seen as bullying your way through the situation. So, what are you going to do to make sure that doesn't happen that way? Cynthia, now would be a good time to ask if there's any questions so far.
Well, let me see. I've got multiple ones. Um, One comment that I want to bring up here is when you're I think it's really great to bring up that idea of avoid and dominate, accommodate versus dialogue, and to mention that when you advocate your own position, then you are making sure that people understand where you stand, and people like to know where you stand is what I find. And so
Mm.
advocating is a really important part, and if you go into a void, nobody's advocating on any side. So everybody's just avoiding, but that doesn't resolve the conflict. If you go into dominating, then you're over advocating your position and not listening to others. If you go into accommodating, then you're not really advocating your position and you're letting everybody else um, get their sway. So when you talk about collaborating, the key is really balancing the opportunity for yourself to say, I just want to let you know where I stand, as well as tell me where you stand. So I think this is a great point that you're making, to know your style and to understand that we're really seeking that balance. So I do like that you've brought that up as a way to really approach conflict. um, we've got some things I think I want to hold till the end because
Okay.
they're a little more broad than where you are. So we'll take them at the end, Emily, so you can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, and the interesting part about knowing your style is I'm a lot of times people And I think it's because conflict just, we're not trained in it usually. Most people aren't trained in it off the bat and how to deal with a conflict in a professional situation. And so I think that people, at least a lot of the people that I work with, either they get stuck either always avoiding or always dominating, because those are the strongest ones. Those are, it's either on or it's off. And and then kind of get into this trap of, well, I just don't know how to deal with conflict, or I hate dealing with conflict. I hear that a lot. Or I just rather not deal with any conflict. I just rather close my door. I worked with one manager who literally closed his door so that people couldn't bring any conflicts to him. And I think that it's one of those things where it kind of snowballs. It gets scarier and scarier and scarier. And and I like the way you put that. Like, I just want you to own your style. This is the way I like to handle it, and knowing that that's what I like to do. For me, I tend to be a pleaser, so I like to really accommodate as much as possible. But I have to know that at some point, if I'm always accommodating, I'm going to feel burned. And that's not really always what's best for the company, what's best for my team, what's best for my leadership, what's best for me as an individual professional person. So I think knowing your style kind of gives you like the chance to say, okay, well, this is how I tend to handle it, but in this situation, how do I want to handle it? It's okay to know that you almost always avoid conflict. That's okay. But in this situation, how do you want to handle it and look at it differently? Or how can you know that you avoid it but still get what you need out of the situation? Um, because it comes back to whatever it is you wanted to happen, whatever you need from the conflict. The conflict comes from some sort of need not being met or some fear um, coming into place. Okay, so the next step, and this is, I think I've said this on almost every step. Like, this is a pretty powerful step, but it's where we want to hang out a lot. So it's all about taking control of the situation. And I think that that's why a lot of people avoid the conflicts as much as possible, because they don't know what to do with it other than to let people argue it out, and that doesn't feel good, and nobody wants to hurt feelings or yell at work, or all those emotions come into work, and that just feels uncomfortable. So we try to stay away from it. But in order to take control, you really, especially as a leader, you want to try to understand um, both sides. And that's what we talked about in the beginning. The first two steps are really looking at both sides of the situation. So once you've gotten past that point where everybody understands both sides, then you're going to try to diffuse the situation, because the more you can remove emotion out of the conflict, the easier it is to come up with a better logical solution. And the diffusing may be in the letting everybody be heard, but then it also may be in, especially in the leadership role, is in letting people know it's okay, or what's at stake. So a lot of times I see where it was not, the person who was the most upset thought that the situation was bigger than it was. So in the scheme of things, the one sales conversation you had that didn't go right may have felt like it was the entire world going wrong, and this person messed it up for you. But to your manager or to the company as a whole, is it really that big? Is anybody going to really fire you over that situation? Is it really as emotional as you're making it out to be? And so you as the leader, or if you're heavy into the conflict yourself, really, how can you diffuse it? How can you take away the emotion for the other person? How can you tell them it's okay? Nobody's losing any jobs. Nobody's going to get walked out of here tomorrow. Nobody's going to hold this against you in the future. We like it when these type of things are brought up to our attention. We like knowing that when this type of thing happens, those kind of words can really help diffuse a situation and get people just to kind of kind of mellow out a little bit and just relax. Um, and then that's where you get into the more logical, and also a little bit into the, is it Okay, is a conflict even there now that the emotion has been removed? And then another step to take control is to really check your language. And this is one that um, it's very tempting when you're very heated. So if you haven't diffused the situation, it's hard to use the right wording. And I will tell you, my least favorite term or um, or phrase that I've heard is "you just need to." And as soon as somebody says that, or if somebody's saying it to me, or I hear myself utter it out of my mouth, I just start to cringe. That "you just need to" will tend to shut the other person down completely. And it just gets walls up, it gets people guarded up. And so if you're trying to say, "you just need to not take this personally," you can't really, yeah, it doesn't really work like that. Or "you just need to tell Bob to knock it off." Okay, well, it doesn't really just work that way. So so always check your language and start to try to get so that you're using words that the other person can hear. And and some of it is through trial and error, some of it's through knowing the people that you work with, and but really just kind of gauging the other person's reactions. If you're getting to the position where you feel like you need to say, "well, you just need to do this," maybe it's more like, "here's what I think would help," or "have you thought of it this way? How about trying this?" There's a lot of different ways you can switch it, although ultimately you're telling them the same thing. Switching that wording, especially in a conflict situation, is extremely important because the idea is to get past the conflict and get and reap the benefits of having the conflict. So when I had the president and the marketing manager that were conflicting with the other two managers, when they were using words that were kind of just putting up these big walls in between them, you could almost feel it when you walked in the room that there were all these walls. And the more it got, the more we were able to chip away at the walls and say, "how about looking at it like this? How would this affect your area if we took things in this direction? What do you think about this idea? What do you think about that? Would this work?" You know, just trying to get those conversations going and diffused, and using language that was not very threatening to the other person was extremely helpful. And the last step in taking control in this is really how to get what you want out of the situation is offering to help the other person. So if the other person, like in that situation where there's this marketing manager and the president, once they started offering to help the other managers with whatever they needed to get done, they were able to get their initiative move forward. It's really hard to argue with somebody who's offering to help you, right? It's hard to say, "well, no, I don't want your help," or "I don't," that's, it's hard to stay mad at somebody who's offering to help. And I found that over and over in a conflict situation, if you can offer to help the other person, that's how you'll start to get what you want out of it. So if you took a step back and you looked at it, "well, here's what I would really like in this meeting. I would really like it if this person wouldn't say X, Y, and Z because it made it seem like it was questioning my authority." Well, okay, but it turns out it was his manager told him to do it. So, okay, well, how can I help you meet your goals that your manager wants to get this project moving forward without, without it affecting me? How can I help you do that, Bob? And then Bob comes up with ideas of how it can help, and then now everybody's happy. So I found the offering to help is really the best way to take control of any conflict situation. Did that spark any questions out there, Cynthia? While I take a quick drink.
Well, it occurs to me that really conflict has a lot to do, and I agree that there's fear that drives conflict, but really sometimes just in the workplace, it's conflict over the way to approach the work or how to
Mm,
do things a lot, and it's conflict of opinion. And what I find is creative and smart and intelligent people have different perceptions, experiences, ideas, and ways of seeing things. And so when I started to look at conflict in my own career as productive, like you opened it, was very productive. What I've found is that if I view it as productive and I see how these differing opinions can help us all reach more of a state of synergy where our ideas put together are really the best idea, conflict helps you get there. So,
Mm-hmm.
taking control of conflict in that situation is just making sure that everyone is getting an opportunity again to share what they want and why they want that, or what their idea is and why they think that'll work better, or why that will work for the situation. And I've led lots and lots of teams, and what I found is that if I was able to get the team talking in that way, where they were sharing their ideas, we could always come up with the best. And after enough dialogue, I found that we would resolve the conflict. And the person that was, let's say, I remember multiple times where a person was really holding on to the way of doing something. And
Mm-hmm.
by letting people talk it out and explain why they uh, had a different opinion and why they had a different solution, it always resolved it. And the person would go, oh, okay, okay. They'd see and they'd understand, and they'd say, you're right, that is a better, and now I see why. So the big thing in taking control is making sure people are talking.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people just need to talk things out so that they can reach understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where with all the people avoiding all these conflicts or not wanting to bring things up, I kind of liken it to a marriage where you if you keep it in that it's frustrating that there's smelly socks on the floor, and then then the toilet seat is up, and then this wet towel is over here, and things kind of seem to snowball out of control, and then the fight that ends up happening seems to be over nothing, but there's all this ammunition in it.
Yeah.
And I found the same thing in organizations. Same thing happens where it's like, okay, well, this one small thing, it really bothered me, but I'm not going to say anything. And then you add another one to it, and another one to it, and another one to it, and then it seems to just kind of blow up out of control. And that's where there have been several times where the conflict that we're getting back to just to resolve, just to clear the air, it can be something that's a couple years old that has just been hanging out there and just wasn't talked about and wasn't expressed, and it just kind of spiraled out of control and bled into other things. Whereas we would like to think we're all professionals and we wouldn't um, make any wrong moves on the part of the company. But I've seen owners do it too, where there are misunderstandings between two business owners, and then that one misunderstanding starts to erode the relationship, and then things start to kind of fall apart, and uh, and then that's where we have to come in and try to help resolve those old conflicts and move forward, and then figure out how to deal with conflicts going forward. But always I always start with just getting people talking, like you said, doing some self reflection to make sure you know what you want and you're not just reacting. And, you might be able to resolve it yourself and say, well, maybe, I was super stressed out, or I put a lot of emphasis on this one presentation that I was giving and took it the wrong way when somebody didn't seem to be paying attention in it. You know, it could be as simple as that, or it could be much deeper. But making sure that you're looking at that and then getting things talked out is extremely important. Okay, so like we said, we've been talking. We understand what the problem is. We've clarified in our head. This is what's bothering me. This is where the conflict's coming from. We went to the other side. We asked the other side of the conflict to clear the air, getting their voices heard, all of that. Then we made sure that we knew our style so that we could own our style and then pick which style we're going to use for this particular conflict. And then we were taking control over it. And then the last step is then to let it go. There's so many times where I feel like I have to pry people's fingers off of a conflict just to let it go and be done with it. I 100% think you should get support. Vent it out to a peer or a coach or somebody else like that. Not in a whining way, but in a, just kind of this is what happened and this is what frustrated me. But just to realize that there's nothing to win per se. I was working with one client and she was extremely upset about a situation that had happened to her, and mostly when we peeled back, I kept peeling back as to what it was about the conflict that was upsetting her, trying to understand it, trying to dig deeper, and um, it came back to she was afraid that it would look like she didn't know what she was doing in her job, and that she would be seen as less than professional or less of an expert to her company. And it really frustrated her that this other person might be getting credit for something that she was doing. And we peeled back, and we're trying to figure out what would be, why would that matter? What would be the harm in that? And one, for the most part, it wouldn't really have played out that way, but she was very frustrated. So she was playing out this huge scenario of how the whole company was going to think she was a fraud and that this other guy was awesome, even though it was, in her mind, it was the other way around. Um, and the more we went around and around, the end result that she wanted was for this project to move forward, and if this person took some ownership in it, it that's all they really needed for it to go forward. And it didn't really matter who was getting it. Ultimately, she would win by getting the project to go, and having his buy-in in it. And when it came down to it, she just said, she just didn't want him to win. And and then she sat back and she said, well, now I feel really childish for saying that, but that's really what it came down to. I didn't want him to win, even though it doesn't matter. Even though it was for the good of the company, it did, all of it came down to she just didn't want him to win. And at that point, she realized that she needed to let go of the conflict. It wasn't something that they had resolved it as much as they could. It was what it was going to be, but it was time to just let it go. And there are a lot of times where, like I said, I'll go into a company and people have been holding on to things or past experiences for way too long. And you can set the new normal. The new normal starts today. How's it going to be from now on? How's it going to be starting tomorrow? Uh, the past is in the past, and it's time to just let it go. And and that is probably the step that I see people just um, usually I get a lot of chuckles out of it because people are like, oh yeah, I've been holding on to that forever, but like the most resistance is where I get as well. The other steps seem a lot easier, even though you're diving in and you're digging through some emotions possibly, or you're kind of letting things get hashed out. But to just let go of it, sometimes people really struggle in that area. And that to me is the last step and the most important one to move forward. Did that bring up any questions in the chat?
No, not really. You can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that was really that was the last step there. So if there was any other questions that we need to dive into, otherwise I can start to wrap it up. I think we're running a little bit early today here.
Actually, we're doing perfect. So you're
Oh,
doing
good.
well. Yeah. I You've made so many great points and you've simplified them and boiled them down. So I hope that people see that there's just take responsibility and take ownership. And I love the fact that the last story you told about the woman who didn't want somebody else to win. In teams, we really have to be about everybody winning. And
Mm,
she may, hopefully, after kind of clearing it in her own head, be able to go to the other person and see how they can win together so they both can pull it off together. So
yeah.
that's a really, that counterbalance, point of balance, point of ownership, and how we can do it together really is where teams, when they get to that point where they want to win together and they want to help each other and lift each other up and support each other, encourage all that stuff, that's what makes winning teams, with things that can be literally seen or heard around the world. So by getting those, uprooting those feelings and those conflicts, you really free up a lot of extra space in your mind and in
Oh,
the
definitely.
in your relationships to do great things.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when we started this webinar, the statistics show that it's 30 to 50% of your time, depending on how well conflicts have been handled in the past, can be spent as a manager just handling conflicts. And you think of all the things you could be so much more productive with if people could go out and handle the conflict on their own a little bit more. Um, and again, not to completely have them disappear, but to do it less often and to have a system to be kind of walking everybody through every time. I think it's super helpful. So with that, I can kind of wrap it up here for you. Uh, my main focus and the methodology that I teach from is always about being people focused, and it's always better to have the whole team functioning, which is what Cynthia was just alluding to there. It's all about the team, and the team through all the other people is how we get things done. I had one person reach out to me the other day and said that he didn't think he was a leader. And to me, if you have ever had to get anything done through other people, then you're a leader. And I'm pretty sure nobody has ever lived in a bubble and has never had to interact with anybody in their lives. You always have to interact with other people to get things done. And to me, that's what it takes to be a leader. And then it's just a matter of how well you do at it beyond that. So always stay people focused. And again, I like to always bring it back to Yoda. And you're not the Luke Skywalker out there as the leader. You're not the one who is trying to do everything. You're trying to get your team to be empowered and engaged and grow into a position where they can run themselves, just like Yoda did. And remember the steps that we went through to resolve a conflict, and this is what you can walk through with your team and with your peers the next time you have a conflict, is you're going to seek to understand, make sure that you looked at is it me and what do I want out of the situation. Then you're going to go into the other side, clear the air. People really want to be heard. That's really, people really want to be heard. So start there and see how much you, a lot of your conflicts will end right there. And then know your style. Are you dominating, avoiding, accommodating, compromising, collaborating? How are you looking at things? How are the other people looking at things? And what is the style that you want to use for that particular conflict? You can change it. You don't have to always go the same route. It's completely up to you. And then take control. Make sure that you understand both sides, diffuse the situation, check your language to make sure that it's getting you the result you want, and then offer to help. It will take you so far. And then when it's all said and done, everybody's agreed that this is where the conflict is ending, let it go. Just let it go and move forward. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Cynthia. Thank you so much for your time.
There we go. And unfortunately, it took away your screen. Let me see if I can show that. I want to make sure that we talk about what you're going to talk about next. So on June 17th, Emily will be back to talk about culture. And this is a focus on full team engagement. So create your culture for full team engagement. So she'll be back with us. And let me talk with you about whoops, there we go. My screen is not working very well today for some reason. I'm not sure what's going on, but We do have next week, we'll be hosting Nancy Lynn Roberts will be doing screen for us, background screening, and she's been a very popular series over the last few months, and we have lots of her webinars that you'll want to go and look at. Also, we have Ken Stroman. He's coming up, and he's the America's Asking Coach. He's going to talk about 7 keys to successful high stakes asking. So when you have the major ask, maybe it's you're going to ask someone to marry you, or maybe it's going to ask for a raise, or any of those kind of things. Maybe it's a sales situation. You'll want to come back for Kent Stroman, and then we'll have Kenna Lewis back for Twitter. And so that's the lineup coming up. We hope that you will join us by coming to businessperformanceusa.org and just, there you can look for this little bee and become a member. And it's no charge to you, and just join our webinars. If you want to go back in there and look at our videos, you can find all kinds of great speakers. These are executive volunteers that give their time to help you learn and grow in your career and help you deal with situations like conflict on your team, like we talked about today. So with that, folks, we hope to have you back. Emily, thank you so much for your very simple and insightful comments on how to work very effectively through conflict. And we look forward to hosting you back on June 17th. Folks, go out and make it a great day. And with that, this is the end of our webinar. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.